Do you think that we are or should be ashamed of the name, the Church of Christ? As we look around, there are a lot of movements to eliminate the name of Christ and call the church by some other name. You think that we are or should be ashamed of the name Church of Christ?
Yeah, I don't like to be the first one to speak all the time.
Sorry.
But let me come out and say no. No, I do not believe that we should be ashamed or afraid of the name Church of Christ or to be identified with churches of Christ. And I believe that wholeheartedly. In fact, I believe it's something to be proud of, fundamentally. And so I don't hide it, and I don't make apologies for it. I don't think anybody else here would contradict me on that. Now, with that being said, I think we do have to realize that there is a tremendous, and I'm having to choose my words very carefully, so y'all don't hate me for this. But the reality is there is a lot of baggage associated with the name Church of Christ. Okay. Now, why that baggage is there, that's not the issue. Because you get it, you hear conversations and there's a lot of finger pointing going on. That's not the issue, how we got here per se. But I think the question has to become, okay, what can we begin to do to repair our name in the eyes of not just the religious community, but the community. Period. And so what I really see is not, I don't believe the answer to this dilemma is changing the name. I believe, or dropping the name. Some have chosen to do that. That's their decision. I think fundamentally we have to look at it as an opportunity to get to work. All right, and show the community that the Church of Christ is relevant. You've heard that word used quite a bit. That we are relevant. And that we are people sensitive, and we do recognize the needs of individuals and the community, and we are present to help meet those needs. So no, it's not anything to be ashamed of, but we do have to be honest about the position of that name in the minds of many for whatever reason that might be.
Where I grew up, I'm a Moss. That's my last name. And I have 9 uncles, and they all wear the last name Moss. And I have 4 brothers, 3 brothers, and they all wear the last name Moss. And I got 32 male cousins, and they all wear the last name Moss. I'm trying to tell y'all something, don't fool with Brother Moss, amen. Because we roll deep, but no. Now, all of us, out of all those Mosses, I was the first one to get a college education. Okay? My family is not unlike anybody else's family. I got some uncles that's been in prison, some uncles that smoke crack, some uncles that beat their wives. I got all that stuff in my family. But I'm not ashamed to be a Moss. Okay? And my point is that we got baggage in the Church of Christ. That's not, and I don't mean to negate what you're saying, but the baggage has nothing to do with the name. The baggage has everything to do with the people who wear the name. Okay, because I'm a Moss, but my uncle that's locked up is a Moss. But when they see me, they don't see my uncle that's locked up. But we wear the same last name. Now, I am not ashamed of the Church of Christ. I'm not ashamed of being a preacher in the Church of Christ. Let me just say this. And I want to say this. I'm real passionate about this because sometimes young preachers get this stigma attached to them that we don't want to be the Church of Christ. If we didn't, I think all these brothers up here have a skill set enough that if we didn't want to preach in the Church of Christ, we didn't have to. But we choose to do what we do because we love the Church of Christ. We believe it's the only church you can be saved in. Amen. We believe it's the one that Jesus purchased with his own blood. But we have to not just preach it and believe it, but we got to live it. And that's, as I tell people at Lake Como, Fort Worth, that's everybody from the pulpit to the parking lot. Because that's the only way we're going to change the stigma or the baggage that's attached to the name of the church.
Right. And can I touch on that? There are over, you know, and I'm not great at math. There's billions of people in the world. There are billions of people in the world. And sometimes we act like everybody knows the Church of Christ. So you feel and I believe in some circles we are ashamed of the Church of Christ. If we're honest, we are ashamed. You can ask your neighbor across the street what church you go to. I go to Mount Zion Baptist Catholic Cathedral, Deep Down Valley Baptist Church, and my pastor is such and such, and they proud. Yeah. You know. You ask one of us, what church you go to? Oh, they want to offer ginseng and we don't say Church of Christ. We avoid the name Church of Christ because we assume that everybody knows the Church of Christ. And out of the billions of people that know that are in this world, I want to say 70% at least have never even heard of the Church of Christ. So the need to change, we have the opportunity to present a new, the identity of the Church of Christ to a new generation. Instead of feeling of me that there are so many people who know it, and maybe that used to be true, you know, 19.
Well, I just want to just say something wrong. I believe that that's true to be the case because I believe we're known more for what we don't do rather than what we do. Don't get me wrong, the doctrine is important. I believe in the doctrine, but when you ask someone, you Church of Christ, y'all don't have women preachers. Y'all don't have instrumental music. Y'all say everybody's going to hell. Y'all say that we're known for what we don't do, which I'll stand on it and back it and defend it to the day I die. But what we miss out is that aspect of the Christian faith which involves good works. Good works. Jesus said, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you display love for one another. So I believe we have to start being known for what we do. And if we were known for coming together and doing more for people, and meeting people where they are, then they would know us.
All right. That point right there that's it. Me and Brother Willie, we had a conversation one day. Starbucks is something we were at, and we some coffee drinking people up here. But we were somewhere, and he put a profound question on me. If your congregation, if they closed the doors and they never came there again, would anybody in your neighborhood care? Would your neighborhood be devastated that, oh Lord, there goes what I used to have that I don't have anymore because so-and-so Church of Christ is gone? If that's not the case, then that in and of itself is a problem. We have to create a presence in our community where our community depends on us. So then we become people known not just for what we teach, but also what we do. And I think that if we grow into that, we grow into the effectiveness that the Lord aspires to.
Do you feel there is disrespect today by young preachers for older preachers?
I'll take that one because among those up here, I'm in the little bit different situation where I'm actually the family and youth minister at the Marcellus Baptist congregation and not the senior minister. And so in my case, I get the opportunity to work with Brother David Lane, who is the senior minister, and I have a great deal of respect for him. So I can speak personally that in my case, and I came from the Eastside Church of Christ in Austin, I have a great deal of love and respect for Brother George Williams. The reason why I preach today is because Brother Patrick Worthy saw me play preach at the state youth conference and said, basically, if you can play like that, I want to see if you can really preach. So I have a great deal of respect and admiration for him as well as others. And so I think that the respect is there, the appreciation is definitely there for the service and the sacrifice. I think one of the things that may kind of trip people up is when we compare where many of us start our ministry in terms of pay, in terms of the size of the congregation, versus where some of the older ministers started their ministry. And so when you even take the city of Dallas, some of the larger churches of Christ have younger ministers. And so there can be this feeling by some, a perception that, okay, look at where I am, look at where you started, or as an older minister looking at a younger minister, he may say, you know what, you really don't appreciate the sacrifice. You don't appreciate the blood, sweat, and tears. It's not that we don't, it's that we understand you fought so we wouldn't have to. Same way with the civil rights struggle. There was a fight so that this generation wouldn't have to fight. So we appreciate that, but we're not trying to go back. Yeah. And I think that's where some of the divide happens, because some people want to take us back there, and we have an appreciation for it, and we appreciate it enough to say thank you, let's not go back there.
In other words, we don't want chicken and a couple of hens and watermelons. All right. Any other comment on that?
Now, I just want to say that personally, most of us have learned everything that we learned from an old preacher. And so, I don't know, knowing these gentlemen, none of these guys blatantly or inadvertently disrespect any of the older ministers in this area, as far as I know. But we do want more of a relationship with some of the older gentlemen. Because they got, there's the adage, there you go, old fool. Okay, so what I'm saying is, just because you start out, your first congregation got 300 or 400 or 500, and you 35 years old, that doesn't mean that when you're 55 years old, you're going to have 300, 400, 500. You might have 30, 40, or 50. But my point is that the older ministers got there because of what they experienced and the mistakes that they made and how they were able to bounce back from it. And I think that what we're looking for is some more of those guys who don't mind saying, hey, this is where I bumped my head, and this is how you can avoid making the same mistake.
I'd like to chime in on that as well. Not certainly concur with everything that Mr. Moss mentioned, but I will say that there is a level of disrespect in some circles. I think a lot of it, as Mr. Moss mentioned, has to do with where your roots and where you come from and how you got to where you are. If you got to where you are because there were some older men who took you under their wing and mentored you, well, quite naturally, your view of older ministers and your relationship with them is going to be different. But if you are a young minister who finally was blessed by God to work as a senior minister of a congregation, and you had a quote-unquote light and scratch to get it, and no older minister would ever give you an opportunity, okay? Or worse yet, there are some ministers who are disrespectful and maybe don't have a healthy relationship with older ministers because they've been wounded by older ministers, if we just want to be honest about it. And so I think there are some situations where, yes, younger ministers are a little disrespectful or maybe not as appreciative, but many times that comes out of a negative experience that they had or what was perceived as a negative or harmful experience with an older minister.
And I want to touch on that, and we all know, and we all know, there are some, if we be honest, there are some preachers, and maybe even some older preachers, that will snub you, won't shake your hand, look at you like you're coming for an autograph. I'm just trying to tell you that your leg, your pant leg is down. You need to, I wasn't trying to get an autograph. And there are some that will disrespect you. And you may not be at the height of your ministry, or you may not be fully developed. And if we'll be honest, sometimes an older minister will look at a younger minister and just look over him. Well, that young minister, who would have ever known that we would be here after all of these years, that little boy gets older, gets more mature, but he doesn't forget that man or those preachers ignored me when I came and tried to ask them some questions. So that's to kind of piggyback on what you were saying. Sometimes after one or two bad experiences, you disconnect from, those who we look as older preachers. And if that happens many times, and we know some of our contemporaries, if an older preacher who may be wayward in doctrine or may be wayward in lifestyle, if he ever brings these young preachers in, then sometimes the disrespect comes through that relationship too, because that older preacher who took those young preachers in don't get along with that preacher across the street. So you go back to what Brother Bailey was saying, what side are you on? Because if this is my father in the gospel, if this is the preacher who helped me and reared me up, but he doesn't get along with these preachers, then I don't fool with them either. That sometimes happens.
And I think ultimately, I believe everybody would agree, I'm going to speak for myself, the desire to have a relationship with an older preacher is real. Like every young preacher knows that mentorship is powerful. The chance to sit down and kind of on the lines of what Paul was saying, my head was bumped this way, let me tell you about it. Just some of that dialogue, or a chance to say, hey, I'm going through this, based on your experience, is that healthy? Is that how it should be? Should I do something different? I believe that every young preacher wants that. And I believe that if there is a mind or a typecast that we are a group of just young, arrogant renegades, I believe that I would like to speak on behalf and say that that's not the case. To have someone to help is wanted.